Society presentation this evening, focusing on elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation in COVID-19 event. We're very delighted that you're here, and we have a wonderful panel of speakers lined up for you this evening. But before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank PRMS, our platinum partner, who's making this presentation possible. And Ashley is here to say a few words about PRMS to our membership.
Thank you. So I'm Ashley Quatlander, and I work for PRMS in their marketing department. PRMS is a psychiatry malpractice insurance program, and we offer specialized policies to meet psychiatrists' needs, proactive risk management to help reduce the risk of claims and lawsuits. We cover psychiatrists, whether they treat patients via telephone. We offer hundreds of risk management resources and complimentary CMEs specifically designed for psychiatrists. If you're interested in learning more about our great features and benefits or to receive a quote, you can visit prms.com. Thank you for having me with you here tonight.
Thank you, Ashley. We appreciate your support. We're delighted to have you. And as I am delighted to have all our speakers tonight, and I'd like to turn our attention to Ms. Ayana Mortley. She's the workshop training coordinator for the New York City Elder Abuse Center. This is out Weill Cornell Medicine with the Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine. Welcome, Ayana, and thank you so much.
Oops. Thank you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. Good evening, everyone. Julie, thanks, Nery Diaz, for having us be here, and thanks to all of you for being present with us this evening. We are representing the New York City Elder Abuse Center at Weill Cornell Medicine, as Nery said, and really for NYCPS, that's how we shorthand ourselves. Ending the injustice of elder mistreatment is the reason why we exist. We aim to prevent abuse, to assist people who are 60 and over who are being abused or at risk of abuse, in addition to the friends, the family, and the neighbors, the community members who are concerned about them. And we really work to improve the way that professionals, that organizations, and that systems respond to the needs of older adults in the community. I know a lot of us are focused on health and safety during this time, but the New York City Elder Abuse Center continues to push to keep elder abuse education as a priority. We know that older adults are among those at risk for the virus, but also compounding that risk, and unfortunately, public crises like these are times when we see scammers and exploiters just come out of the woodwork. And in COVID-19 specifically, older adults are at higher risk for abuse due to increased isolation or due to observing stay-at-home orders with overwhelmed caregivers or other people who can cause harm. Tensions and frustrations continue to be heightened for many, even as we push to get everyone vaccinated, but there still are increased reports of older adults at risk of harm in the community. So you may have even seen some stories in the news recently, actually. So thanks everyone for staying educated, for staying alert during these really extraordinary times. So I'm Ayana Mortley. I coordinate workshops and trainings for the New York City Elder Abuse Center at Weill Cornell Medicine. I'm joined by my two colleagues who will introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dina Patel. I'm an adult and geriatric psychiatrist, consultant to the New York City Elder Abuse Center and Weill Cornell Medicine.
Hi, I'm Christina McGuire. I am also a consultant to NYCPS and Weill Cornell Medicine. I am by training a digital money laundering investigator and a white-collar defense attorney, but I also look very closely at elder financial exploitation and how it intersects with money laundering.
So the New York City Elder Abuse Center is part of the Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine. And we're thankful to our funders who've helped us to develop and sustain programs that empower the many people who are supporting older adult victims of abuse by initiating a multidisciplinary response. And we're doing this in New York City, in New York State, and across the nation. So these funders are the reason why we are here with you today. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Patel.
Thank you, Ayana. So we're going to talk today a little bit about elder abuse, isolation, and COVID-19. Some of the topics that I'll go over are the definition of elder abuse, what are the components, talk a little bit about the abuse intervention model that we use to conceptualize our cases, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the older adult and elder abuse populations. So what is elder abuse? The CDC defines it as the intentional act or failure to act that causes or creates harm to an older adult. And here they define an older adult as greater than or equal to 60 years old. It's important to also note that the definition says that it necessitates the presence of a trusting relationship between the victim and the offender. So what is the trusted relationship that they're referring to? What constitutes trusted? Well, the more obvious ones are family members, friends, paid caregivers, financial advisors, other professionals, including medical professionals. But the less straightforward one is also people who are initially strangers. And that has been worsening throughout our pandemic. So for example, a dyad can meet online. Although they're initially strangers, they part of grooming that involves becoming acquainted and eventually intimate, emotionally, if not physically, such as in romance scams. It's important to note that that's also a factor here. And so next, I want to talk a little bit about the model that we use when we. So Dr. Laura Mosqueda is a widely respected authority on geriatric and family medicine, elder abuse, and the care of the elderly and underserved. She does a lot of research on this topic and created with her colleagues the Mosqueda Abuse Intervention Model. They did this by combining theories of elder mistreatment, their research on risk factors of elder mistreatment, and with their colleagues and professional staff that had investigated more than 1,000 cases of elder mistreatment. So there are three main factors that we look at. One is the trusted other, which I had just mentioned before. This individual might have some dependency on the older adult, might have some mental health issues that, such as substance abuse, that might make the relationship an issue, and also certain personality traits. And this trusted other effectively is the perpetrator in this situation. The other thing to look at is the vulnerable adult, so the elder abuse victim. They might have some physical function issues. For example, can't perform their ADLs, require assistance, something that creates a need from somebody else, like a trusted other. Might have some cognitive difficulties. It's important to think about capacity in these cases, but also remember that cognitive impairment does not equal incapacity. So sometimes these cases can become a little bit complicated. And then also some mental health issues of the vulnerable adult. So psychological risk factors for elder abuse include depression, anxiety, personality traits like dependent personality, cognitive impairment, loneliness. So loneliness is a subjective feeling of an individual that they feel alone. This can happen whether or not they actually are physically alone in an apartment or house or what it may be. So it's important to think about that factor as well. And then besides the trusted other and vulnerable older adult, there's also the context that we look at. So what, for example, is the relationship between the two individuals? Are there interpersonal dynamics, long-standing dysfunctional relationship, frustration, caregiver burnout, family violence, dependency, and also social integration? Are they isolated? Are they alone? What factors of ageism are there in the case? And then culture as well. Are there power dynamics? What is the person's subculture? And how does that influence how they interact with the trusted other and what their role is? So we make sure to think about all these when we're assessing a case. Next slide. So what is the prevalence and what are the forms of elder abuse? So the prevalence is about 10% of older adults have experienced abuse within 1 year. And according to APS data, staggeringly 30 to 40% of those individuals have experienced more than one type of abuse. So what are the forms of elder abuse? There's financial exploitation, which my colleague will go over in a little bit. caregiver neglect. So that's when the person who's in charge of taking care of the individual is supposed to be obtaining essential food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and even helping them with finances, and might not be doing those important things. Physical abuse, psychological abuse, and sexual abuse. So these are all different forms of elder abuse. It's important to talk a little bit about self-neglect as well, because although self-neglect technically does not involve another person, so a trusted other, so is not always defined as part of elder abuse. Up to 70% of cases referred to APS, according to one study by Dr. Lax at Cornell, showed that self-neglect was a main factor for the reporting of the abuse. So it's always something to think about when you're thinking about elder abuse. Next slide. So what's the scope of the problem? Well, it's pretty large. Elder abuse can be considered a silent epidemic. Over 5 million cases nationwide, and this is a graphic from 2010. This has gone up. 1 in 10 older adults are affected, as we mentioned. And in our city alone, there's 50,000 cases. So really thinking about that, knowing if you see an older adult in your practice, you probably will come across this at some point. And it's important to note that these individuals also have a 3 times mortality rate as compared to the average older adult. It's a really serious problem. Next slide. How does this affect our minority older adults? Well, approximately 20% of older adults in our country are minorities, but very little research is done in these populations. And of the very few studies, one showed African-American older adults are more likely to be financially exploited than the Caucasian American counterparts. And another study looked at Latin American immigrants and found that 40% of them had experienced elder abuse in the previous year. And there is some selection bias in the study, but even with that, that's a staggering number. What are the studies that we have? Again, there's very little in comparison to other kinds of studies in other types of abuse, like child abuse. But what we do see here, I've noted 2 different studies that might be helpful. One is the National Elder Mistreatment Study, which was an 8-year longitudinal study of outcomes. It showed that elder mistreatment 8 years prior increased the risk of negative outcomes by 200 to 700%. The thing that was protective for these individuals was social support, and it protected against things like depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and some self-reported poor health, but not PTSD. And Joanne Siri and colleagues at Cornell looked at elder abuse victims with depressed mood, specifically in relation to PTSD symptoms, found that half met criteria for PTSD, that of the victims that did have PTSD, they had significantly higher suicidal ideation, which speaks highly to risk, as everyone is well aware of in their own practices, and higher rates of PTSD from emotional mistreatment were seen then versus physical mistreatment. So these are things that we could be seeing in our practice. So we should basically, from that study, in fact, we should be screening for PTSD in these individuals and appropriately treating it. Next slide. And then COVID-19, isolation, and elder abuse. So what has happened now during the pandemic? Well, the consequences to older adults in general is that they had more severe complications than younger adults, higher mortality, more concerns about disruption to their routines, disruptions to access to care, difficulty adapting to technology, fear about their mental health and health conditions. And here, thinking about our Mosqueda abuse intervention model, our context has changed as well. We have reduced opportunities for detection and reporting because we've lost senior centers where people might have been able to report what is happening to them. Stay-at-home orders might prevent people from leaving the perpetrator at any point during the day. Nursing home restrictions, again, decreased reporting, worsening ageism, intimate partner violence, and increased caregiver stress and risk for self-neglect. All these things have changed during the pandemic, making it even more difficult for these individuals, which is all the more reason to think about resources for them. And my colleagues will continue and talk a little bit about that. Next is Christina, who will talk about financial exploitation.
There we go. I was just explaining that I was muted. Hi. I'm unmuted. I'm an attorney. My background is in money laundering investigations. A year and a half ago, my 81-year-old father was the victim of a phone scam, classic fraud. My frustration propelled me to start investigating elder fraud cases from a digital money laundering perspective, which brought me to start looking more closely at all forms of elder financial exploitation. Next slide, please. So here's the topics that we're going to cover. I'm going to talk about these in broad strokes so that I have time to tell some stories. There is a lot of excellent material available, and I want to give you resources so that you can go deeper. And also, I am always available to discuss these issues offline because fighting elder fraud is very important to me. So please reach out. Next slide, please. Elder financial exploitation. The central concept is stealing or misusing an older person's money or property without their permission. Next slide. So what is the volume? How much money is lost by victims in the US each year? Each of these estimates is based on surveys and on public data. So why is there such a huge range here? And the reason, which we'll keep coming back to, is because elder abuse, including elder financial fraud, is underreported. What are some of the possible reasons for this? Well, the victim might not realize it's taking place. The victim could also be protecting the perpetrator, for example, an abusive family member. The victim might also fear loss of independence if she appears to be incapable of taking care of herself or of her assets. And then a big one that I see a lot in my practice is shame, and we're going to talk more about that. Another big issue is knowing where to report and how to report, and that's something that Ayana is going to walk us through in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So, okay, we should report. It's important to report, but can I legally report? So, yes. The answer is yes, you can legally report. There's a section of the New York Social Services Law, it's section 473B, which grants immunity from civil liability to anyone who reports suspected elder abuse in good faith. But within that, it provides for a lot of different places where you can report as long as you're doing in good faith and there's suspected abuse or confirmed abuse. And this protection does extend to physicians as well as a lot of other professionals. But then the next question is, okay, do I have to report? And the answer is no. New York State is one of the few states in the country without mandatory reporting laws for elder abuse and neglect, which is unfortunate because increased reporting would highlight the problem, makes it harder to ignore. Hopefully reporting will become mandatory in New York State, but until then, it's up to all of us to report suspected abuse as well as confirmed abuse. Next slide, please. Who are the perpetrators? I have divided perpetrators broadly into two groups. I classify them as the people we know and people that we don't know, strangers. And the reason that I've divided them this way is that the typical forms of exploitation tend to be different for these two groups. However, as Dr. Patel highlighted, these are all trusted relationships. So a stranger who commits a fraud is going to first gain a person's trust, and then they will cause an emotional reaction that overrides the person's rational ability to make decisions. That creation of trust in order to then manipulate is the basis of fraud, broadly speaking, regardless of the type of the target's age, sex, gender, etc. Next slide, please. So what are the tactics of the abusers? And Dr. Patel talked a little bit about this. I've divided them again into tactics that are common to known people and then tactics that are more common to strangers. So exerting power and control and isolation are very common in the known person context. Engendering trust and inducing an emotional reaction are classic stranger scam tactics. Of course, these are not hard and fast classifications, and an adept abuser will use a variety of approaches. Next slide, please. Let's look at some of the common warning signs that you might see in your practice, either individually or in combination. Here I'm going to make up a story that illustrates them all together. This is Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson's wife of 50 years passes away, leaving him lonely, depressed, and susceptible to manipulation. Shortly thereafter, his nephew Simon arrives to help him out. Then Mr. Johnson starts investing a lot of money in a small business that Simon is just starting out. He stops showing up at poker night. When his friends next see him, he's lost weight and he seems disoriented. Within a year, Mr. Johnson passes away and Simon inherits his entire estate. Unfortunately, all of these scenarios are relatively common, so these are things to bear in mind and look out for. Next slide, please. Let's talk first. I divided the scams up into strangers and known people. So let's talk first about exploitation by people the victim knows. The infuriating thing about stranger schemes is that they are not complex and they are not original. And yet they are devastatingly effective because a skillful fraudster creates this relationship of trust and manipulates the victim to make poor decisions within the context of whatever repetitive, tried and true scam it is. So this is a list of very common stranger scams. And because they are so formulaic, there are a lot of public resources that describe them in detail. We're going to give those to you so as not to go through each one of these, but I do want to highlight two of them. The first is the text scam, which I want to point out is the most successful type of phone scam, and these are rampant right now. One variation of this is that someone calls or they email and they say your computer is infected with malware. So I can help you out. You just have to send me payment, usually in the form of gift cards, to fix it. The caller says, oh, you know what, I've run into a problem. I'm going to need a little more, and so on and so forth, until the victim realizes that they're being scammed. And the second that we should pause at are coronavirus scams. About coronavirus scams, I'll say that these tend to be classic formulaic scams, but they are overlaid with a coronavirus element. And they are, as are all phone scams, they are increasingly successful because for the reasons that Dr. Patel was pointing out, and the other COVID things that are happening within the COVID environment. So an example of this would be a cold caller calls and says you've been selected to get the vaccine early. Just provide me with personal and payment information and we'll put you in line. Next slide, please. Here's where I would like to pause and tell a story. My dad is an 81-year-old retired lawyer who built a successful Washington, D.C. law firm from the ground up. But he is not an adept user of technology. So what happened? My dad got a call, which he thought was from Apple tech support, about an issue with his computer. My parents ended up buying and sending $2,000 worth of Best Buy gift cards to the caller, and then they realized that it was a scam. But I want to talk about not the scam, but the aftermath. So I called my parents, and I could tell that something was off. It took some prodding, but my mom and dad eventually told me that they had been scammed, which I was surprised by. But what really shocked me was their shame. They kept saying, we're so stupid, we're so stupid. And I had never seen them like that before. Fraud victims don't come forward. It is underreported. And a lot of times they are not coming forward because they are deeply ashamed. And this is a gift to the fraudsters because the deeper into the shadows the victims retreat, the easier it is going to be for the scammers to steal unchecked from the victims. And then loss of money isn't the only problem. or even the biggest one, there's also a loss of dignity, which goes back to what Dr. Patel was talking about the depression and about the deleterious health effects that come from abuse. This morning, I checked in with my client, John, and I'm going to tell you, John bought $100,000 worth of Best Buy gift cards last summer because he thought he was protecting his life savings from hackers. So this presentation was on my mind. So I told John today, but not for the first time, how impressed I am that he is willing to tell his story. And I want to share his response. I'm not ashamed. I didn't do anything wrong. This wasn't an attempted illegal activity. I thought I was doing the right thing. And that's how it works. And that's what we want to drive home, that the fraudster convinces you that you're doing the right thing. So my goal is for victims and families to understand that stranger scams are a systemic issue and to empower them to step out of the shadows. And John got me thinking, can we maybe help victims recognize that there's no shame in trying to do the right thing? Next slide, please. These are classic non-person schemes, which may be familiar to you. It's exploitation to do any of these things without a person's authorization. And the one here that I would like to look at is misuse of a power of attorney on the next slide. We're going to look at a power of attorney, and then we'll look at guardianship, which Ayana is going to discuss in more detail. So a power of attorney, I distinguish them in terms of who can grant them, where they come from. So a power of attorney is granted by a person. It means someone agent if you're unable to act on your own behalf. And the linchpin here is that in this agreement is that the attorney in fact, who's not actually an attorney or doesn't have to be an attorney, but the attorney in fact in the agreement will act in the principal's best interest. So you can have different powers of attorney for different matters, and you can revoke a power of attorney in writing. And next slide. So then we get to guardianship, and guardianship is the next order of magnitude. If an adult becomes incapable of making responsible decisions due to a mental disability, the court can appoint a substitute decision maker called a guardianship. The guardianship is a legal relationship between the guardian and the person who, because of incapacity, is no longer able to take care of his or her own affairs. And that is the ward. The guardian can be authorized to make legal decisions, financial decisions, healthcare decisions, for the ward. I need to point out that this type of guardianship is called an Article 81 guardianship when it is an adult who's become incapable of making these decisions. And I point that out because my slide refers to an Article 17A guardianship, which serves a different purpose. Unlike a power of attorney, which is granted and then revoked in writing by a person, the guardianship process is begun by petitioning the court and can only be ended by the court. Guardianship involves a profound loss of freedom and dignity. So state laws require the guardianship be imposed only when less restrictive alternatives, like a power of attorney, have been tried and proven to be ineffective. We have two handouts from the New York Legal Assistance Group that describe the pros and cons of guardianship, the petitioning process, and alternatives to guardianship that we're going to give to you. Next slide, please. Since this is a financial exploitation presentation, let's talk a little bit about common forms of abuse of powers of attorney and guardianship. Power of attorney scams are extremely common, even more so during COVID. A power of attorney gives somebody the authority to act on behalf of the other person, and that's useful in most situations. But when it's abused, the older adult can lose their savings, their assets. It's often to an unscrupulous family member. A classic scenario would be a child coming to the hospital the day after a parent's surgery with some documents to sign. And unbeknownst to the signer, who's probably pretty out of it the day after a surgery, the child has just transferred title, for example, to the family home to themselves. Let me point out, if somebody is a victim of fraud or elder abuse involving an unauthorized power of attorney, you really need to act quickly, because once the assets are stolen, it can be very difficult to get them back. You can revoke the power of attorney, you can demand the return of stolen money and property, and then you file a lawsuit. Guardianship abuse, we'll look at, yes, guardianship abuse. So courts name guardians to protect adults, but in some circumstances, the guardians are the abusers, and they have immense power over the adults who are in their care. I'll give you a description of a guardianship abuse from a court case. We have Ms. H, who's 87 years old and has advanced Alzheimer's. Her son is her guardian and has related to the court his belief that her estate had been plundered by her former guardians, her daughter and nephew. The court appointed an attorney to represent Ms. H, who discovered that the nephew had stolen $100,000. Her daughter had coerced her mother to sign over ownership of 40 acres of valuable land, had stolen an heirloom diamond necklace, and had forced Mrs. H to sign over ownership of shares of stock. So in this case, the attorney filed a recovery action demanding the return of the judge ordered the daughter return the land and assets. He imposed double damages for the nephew's bad act, and he awarded Ms. H $200,000. This is a pretty typical guardianship abuse example. Also will illustrate for you how complex and legally intensive it is to address a guardianship gone wrong. And I will emphasize, guardianship should really be a tactic of last resort. Next slide, please. The Brooke Astor story combines power of attorney fraud, family feuds, guardianship petitions, Alzheimer's, philanthropy, and New York high society. And hopefully I've sufficiently hooked you that you will go look up Brooke and her story, because I think the best use of our remaining time is for Ayana to talk about reporting and resources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Patel. Thank you, Christina. Now that we've talked about the ins and outs of elder abuse dynamics and financial exploitation dynamics, I want to take some time and talk about the response to elder abuse cases. New York City is actually really fortunate to have a multitude of agencies who can receive and investigate reports of elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. These are three organizations that are often a part of the response to elder abuse cases. You may have referred a case to one of these agencies before, and they each are different, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences. Identifies a suspected case of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, where are they most likely to report? Adult Protective Services is where the report is most often made. Adult Protective Services has specific criteria for providing services to individuals in the community. They serve adults, so that's individuals who are 18 and over, who have physical and or mental health conditions, who are facing a risk of harm in the community, and who do not have anyone else who's able or willing to assist them with that risk. Luckily, Adult Protective Services is actually the only mandated reporter to law enforcement in New York State. So when a crime has occurred to an Adult Protective Services client, APS refers to the NYPD and the district attorney, and they collaborate to keep that person safe. It's important to note that APS deals with issues of cognition and capacity. So they can provide involuntary services to individuals with diminished capacity or who lack capacity. And that can include financial management for cases where there's financial exploitation and the individual is unable to manage their finances adequately to stop the exploitation. And as Christina was mentioning, as a last resort, guardianship. So to emphasize Christina's point, when we say last resort, we really, really do mean last resort. Least restrictive intervention to the most restrictive intervention, considering guardianship when all other options have been exhausted. when the client lacks capacity to make their own decisions and they are still facing a risk of harm in the community, Adult Protective Services is the agency that can petition the Supreme Court to appoint a guardian. And that person can be appointed guardian of and make decisions regarding the person, their property, or both. The Supreme Court often prefers to appoint a family member or other trusted person who has the client's best interest in mind, but New York City is actually fortunate enough to contract with a number of community-based organizations who can be appointed as a community guardian when there's no one else, no family or other alternative to step in as a guardian. So the Department of the Aging is the second big agency that responds to a lot of reports of older adults who need support in the community. They serve older adults who are 60 and over, and adults who are self-directed and willing to receive voluntary services. So keep in mind, Adult Protective Services can provide involuntary services for people with diminished capacity or cognition or other impairments, and Department for the Aging serves people who are able to receive voluntary services. They work with older adults who want to advocate for themselves, who want to be empowered, who want guidance and support. As you may know, they coordinate really a wide array of in the community, and that includes home care, that includes socialization programs, that includes housing support, that includes senior employment, which I recently learned about. The Department for the Aging contracts with a community-based program in each of the 5 boroughs of New York City to provide social work and legal elder abuse prevention and intervention services. So they also are part of the response to elder abuse cases quite often. Both Adult Protective Services and the Department for the Aging provide services in a variety of languages, and they have access to language interpretation services that allow them to work with clients from diverse backgrounds. Now, the New York City Elder Abuse Center is designed to provide support to the professionals like you and concerned persons who are in the lives of professionals who are working with older adults in the community and are identifying suspected or confirmed elder abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. The New York City Elder Abuse Center provides case consultations free of charge to those professionals. Our clinician and specialists, who I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, aid professionals in identifying how to best engage the client, how to safety plan with the client when they are at risk of harm, and helps them assess where to refer the client and what resource may most benefit the client. So even if you as a professional is not quite ready to report, we can help you assess what the best next steps might be and provide you support as you do that. For friends, family, and neighbors of elder abuse victims who we refer to as concerned persons, we have a helpline for concerned persons, which is the first of its kind in the nation, that provides supportive counseling, resources, and other supports. It goes without saying that those who comprise the of older adults are integral to keeping them in the community and keeping them safe in the community. However, the people who are part of the support systems can experience distress when there are abusive circumstances. They are often the ones who are calling, checking in on the older adult, bringing food to the older adult's home, making a report when they're concerned the older adult is being harmed, spending their own money to make sure that the person has what their needs met. And so they can experience distress because they are being empathic and caring to a person who is experiencing harm. So the research shows that when these concerned persons also receive support, counseling, resources, reassurance, it keeps the older adult safer in the community. The older adult gets the attention and intervention that they need faster, and the older adult who's facing a risk of harm or currently being harmed, often the situation does not rise to the level of needing an emergency intervention. So this helpline provides support to those concerned persons in the lives of elder abuse victims. Finally, the New York City Elder Abuse Center coordinates what we call enhanced multidisciplinary teams on elder abuse in the 5 boroughs of New York City, and we're part of a network of enhanced multidisciplinary teams across New York State, which I'll talk about in a moment. the bottom line is if you need to pick up a phone and get help for the older adult in the community, we recommend that you call 311. I know you probably did not take down the numbers that were on those previous slides, but 311 is the magic number. It's the city's main line, as you know, and they can ensure that the right agency will engage the older adult and assess their situation if you call and report a situation of suspected or confirmed abuse. The great thing is that all of the aforementioned agencies are part of an elder abuse response network, which ensures that regardless of who is the first person to make contact with the older adult currently being harmed or at risk of harm in the community, whether it is a psychiatrist, whether it's a social worker, whether it's a housing manager, whether it's a security guard, whoever makes a report, the older adult can access a coordinated response. So Adult Protective Services, Department for the Aging, and a number of other agencies, which you'll see in a moment, are partners with NYCPS in this mission. We all work together, we have each other's backs, and we ensure that the most complex elder abuse cases access the coordinated, multidisciplinary response that they need. So to visualize what elder abuse cases can look like, we've given a lot of case examples. We've talked a lot about warning signs and ways that elder abuse and financial exploitation cases can manifest, but I want to provide a visual of what these cases often look like. So I'm going to show this video. Earlier, Dr. Patel previewed the abuse intervention model created by Laura Mosqueda and her colleagues. And so let's keep the abuse intervention model in mind as we watch the video. So let's consider what we can gather about the older adult in the video, about her physical condition, about her cognition, about her mental health status, what we can gather about the trusted other, any personality traits, any mental health, any evidence of some type of dependence between the two of them, and anything about the context, including what, isolation, the quality of the relationship, and culture. The aim, or the abuse intervention model we call the AIM, is designed to help us assess the risk factors for abuse, and it's useful to keep in mind when you are working with older adults and you're encountering what could be suspected abuse.
Hello, son. Did you get my medicine?
Damn it, Mom. Just got back from work. Give me a minute to unwind, will you? Jeez.
I'm sorry. How was work?
How do you think it was? Nothing ever works out for me. It sucks. Mom, you got this pile of pills in front of you. You know how much those cost? What do you need a new one for, really?
But Michael, the doctor said that I need that.
Oh, you don't remember shit anymore. If you don't like the way I'm helping, if you don't like the way I'm taking care of you, I'm going to put you in one of those homes. Think about that. That'll give some. Think about living in one of those places. I'll take you over to one of those places.
Oh, no, Michael, please, don't say that. I'm sorry. I'll be okay. You're right. I've got all these pills. I can wait. Are you going to go to work today, Michael?
Work? Where do you think I've been all day? You are so clueless. I got to get out of here.
Michael, I'm sorry. I'll be good. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So this video is very tough to watch. I've seen it many, many times, and nonetheless, it's very difficult to watch. And so this video is a reenactment. It's designed to illustrate what happens behind so many closed doors and what makes elder abuse situations so complex. Many elder abuse cases look like this. We're talking about family members here, family situations, trusted contacts, spouses, grandchildren, children. We're talking, in this case, the man, her son, he's frustrated with work, right? She's dependent on him for her care needs, and probably not just her physical care needs, but her emotional support as well. We see that he walks in the door. The first thing he does is, pop open a can of beer. So he's abusing substances. Maybe there are other mental health conditions there with him, but he's probably her only support system. Actually, this is the first time I noticed, and I've seen this video countless times, this is the first time I've noticed that there are pictures in the background of people who appear to be other family members. So we don't know where these family members are, if she's isolated from them, if she has any contact with them, or if they're even deceased. And maybe this son is all that she has left. So of course, she may be frightened, but she wants to maintain his support and his love. She doesn't want to upset him. She's saying, I'm sorry, even though he has just threatened to put her in a nursing home, right? We see so many cases like this that include environmental hazards in the background. You may have noticed beer cans and liquor bottles strewn there, and stacks of papers is behind there as well. There may even be a cognitive decline element to this. This woman could not remember if her son had just come home or not. And then if we look closely, that we can consider that there might even be a physical abuse risk. So he raised his hands towards her this time, but maybe another time he would strike her when he raises his hands. So lots of cases look like this, and as providers, professionals, we may only catch just a glimpse of that while all of this is happening behind this woman's closed doors. With a situation this complex, what can an intervention possibly look like? An intervention could involve this woman's doctor, it could involve home care, it could involve a friendly visitor, it could involve home delivered meals, it could involve a nurse for her medication support, it could involve a cleaning in her home, it could involve counseling for the son or substance treatment for the son, maybe even financial management. We don't know if she's depending on him to manage the finances, if it's her money that's being spent on the liquor. So we at the New York City Elder Abuse Center like to say that due to the complex nature of elder abuse cases, no one professional, no one organization, no one system can address an elder abuse case alone, and that these cases need a multidisciplinary response. Our mission at the New York City Elder Abuse Center is to improve the response to elder abuse cases through collaboration and coordinate a response that might look something like what I just described for the woman in the previous video. When professionals collaborate to quickly intervene in elder abuse cases, these efforts culminate in what we call enhanced multidisciplinary teams, or EMDTs. The primary purpose of an EMDT is to investigate, to intervene, and to stop all forms of abuse: financial exploitation, physical abuse, psychological abuse, neglect by others, sexual abuse. While multidisciplinary teams are used in child services, in education, in medicine, as I'm sure you know, the multidisciplinary model is extremely effective when applied to elder abuse cases that are often way more complex than we originally realized when we're working with the older adult in the community. EMDTs review current of elder abuse and apply multidisciplinary approaches to address the identified issues. EMDTs include representatives from Adult Protective Services, aging services, health and human services, financial and banking services, law enforcement, and others who you'll see on this slide who meet under the facilitation of a coordinator. This graphic shows the disciplines who are typically represented at these meetings, which are now occurring over Zoom in each of the 5 boroughs and across New York State. The goal is for there to be no duplication of disciplines and for there to be an expert who can speak to any potential element that can emerge in an elder abuse case. The teams are enhanced by what we call specialty services that include a forensic accountant to investigate and assess the depth of financial exploitation, geriatrician and geriatric psychiatrist to address the very common mental and medical health aspects of these cases, and a civil legal attorney to aid with navigating the legal documents and the court systems that are often part of the case and often part of the intervention as well. And so the individuals who comprise those specialty services we call specialists are also accessible to professionals for consultations. This is a lot of text on the slide, yes, but this is a list of the partners that make up our network of dedicated professionals tackling elder abuse cases at our EMDTs. There's typically 14 disciplines represented at our teams. I also want to take a moment and share a useful resource with you, because I know that you may have encountered situations where the older adult or the person in the community who's facing harm needs refuge, needs to get away from the environment where they're being harmed. And so this is a useful resource for that. We've discussed that elder abuse is committed by family members or trusted contacts, which can make the older adult's home unsafe, especially now when many people observing stay-at-home orders with others who can potentially cause harm. Domestic violence shelters and homeless shelters, they generally cannot accommodate the medical, the cognitive, and the therapeutic needs that are very common to older adults who are experiencing abuse. And so as a result, older adults often remain in unsafe environments because they have nowhere else to go. So the Weinberg Center at the Hebrew Home in Riverdale in the Bronx is actually the nation's first temporary elder abuse shelter. Has anyone heard of the Weinberg Center? I'm trying to look at the participants. Has anyone heard of the Weinberg Center? I'm looking for nodding heads or raised hands. Okay, so it's the nation's first temporary elder abuse shelter. It's designed to offer elder abuse victims a safe and comfortable space where they can regain their dignity, they can reassert control, they can develop resilience that they need to then return to the community after experiencing abuse. It serves individuals 60 and over in New York City and in Westchester County who don't have a safe place to live due to ongoing or imminent elder abuse situations. They determine eligibility on an individual basis. They are grant funded, and so they can work with anyone regardless of their ability to pay, just so that they can provide a refuge for someone who's facing harm in their home or in the community. There's no maximum length of the stay for a person who needs this resource, and it's designed as a holistic and trauma-informed model of care that provides legal, therapeutic, and medical support in the framework of the relationship between the client, between the older adult who's facing harm, and the team, the multidisciplinary team that exists at the Weinberg Center. So Weinberg is one of the partners, they were on the previous slide, of the New York City Elder Abuse Center. Information about their shelter after we meet. So I'm cognizant of the time, and I would like to share a quick case example, but I see that we have about 6 minutes left. Are people okay with going over by a couple of minutes so that I can share this case example? Feedback, type in the chat, raise hands. I don't want to take more time if people are not able to accommodate it. Okay, thank you, Laura, okay, I see raised hands. We can stay over a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, so I want to take time to give a case example because it's difficult to visualize what a multidisciplinary response looks like. So this is a case that actually came from one of our EMDTs in the 5 boroughs. And it's the case of Miss R. So Miss R came to the enhanced multidisciplinary team through APS. As I said earlier, most often when the report of abuse is made, it's made to APS. And a lot of the cases that come to the multidisciplinary teams come from Adult Protective Services. So and they were trying to collaborate with Miss R and her other family members. They were trying to collaborate with Ms. R and her other family members to create a safe home environment with care services that she greatly needed. Ms. R was an 84-year-old Hispanic female who was a homeowner and residing in New York. She was legally blind and she had some memory impairment, but she had been living independently until her son and his wife, her daughter-in-law, moved into her home. It was believed that the son had encouraged Miss R to refinance her home, and during this process, he had her sign the deed to her home into his name without Miss R knowing that she had done so. While living with Miss R, her son had Miss R pay him monthly for household expenses, and the son and the daughter-in-law were also verbally and emotionally abusive. Taken her house key to prevent her from going to her senior center, to prevent her from going to church, and gaslighted her into thinking that she had just lost her key. They had also blocked home care and home delivered meals when Miss R had reached out to social services in the past to get those services. So at this point, Miss R was scared of her son and her daughter-in-law. And so when Adult Protective Services offered services to her, she declined. When APS revealed to Miss R that her son had tricked her into signing the deed into his name, she actually confronted her son about it. And his response was what? Take all of her items, put them in garbage bag, throw them down the stairs, and threaten to kick her out. So Ms. R actually did want to obtain, which is we find quite rare, she actually did want to obtain a limited order of protection against her son and daughter-in-law forward with it. Additionally, Ms. R had another son who was the agent of her power of attorney and was a police officer, but her other son was also too afraid to visit Ms. R and to help her with her care and her shopping due to fear of the abuse of her brother who was abusing her. So Adult Protective Services initiated a multidisciplinary approach to this case, just given the complex nature of the financial exploitation, the relationship of trust, the medical condition, and the care needs, as well as the emotional and the agencies who are part of the response. So legal aid, JASA, legal and social work elder abuse program, the Psychiatrist, and social workers were just some of the professionals and agencies who were involved in working to keep Ms. R safe. Legal aid determined that Ms. R's son was in fact solely on the deed to the home and had refinanced the house, with the possession and the usage of the monies unknown. They also confirmed that Ms. R's son had initiated eviction proceedings against Ms. R to have her leave her own home. And legal aid investigated whether there was a possibility to reverse the deed transfer. After Adult Protective Services confronted the son about the eviction proceedings, legal aid was then able to confirm when the eviction proceedings had been discontinued after APS confronted him. The JASA LEAP program successfully offered and provided supportive counseling to Ms. R, as she was experiencing a lot of distress, being abused by her son and her daughter-in-law. And JASA LEAP assisted her with obtaining a limited order of protection against her son, which appeared to temper his behavior. They also worked with Ms. R to obtain her legal documents and ensure that the attorney who was secured to represent her in her deed theft case had all the appropriate documentation. To determine Ms. R's cognitive capacity, APS scheduled a psychiatric evaluation for Ms. R. Prior to the evaluation, the team's geriatric psychiatrist spoke to the APS psychiatrist, as sometimes when a social worker or another professional in the community tries to talk to medical professionals, the language doesn't always add up. So psychiatrists were able to convey the items that should her psychiatric evaluation so that the APS psychiatrist could perform a thorough evaluation based on the concerns and the needs of the case. Social workers at the EMDTs counseled the APS caseworker on how to engage Ms. R's other son, who was previously assisting her, but had ceased assisting due to a fear of his brother who was abusing their mom. With encouragement from APS and JASA LEAP, the son who was a agent of the power of attorney who had been helping before resumed visiting Ms. R and was offering her emotional support and love, and actually hired the attorney who began to pursue the deed theft case. So due to this collaboration and communication, there were a number of positive outcomes for Ms. R. A family court judge ordered the son to provide Ms. R with the keys to her home so she could resume traveling to church as she previously had without the fear of being locked out when she returned home. Additionally, JASA LEAP had arranged for Ms. R's home to have repairs and to be made more accessible to her so that she could navigate her home more safely. APS was able to implement home care for Ms. R, ensuring that her home was clean and that she had sufficient food and supplies in the home. And the attorney secured by her son continued to work diligently to try to restore her home into her legal possession. Ms. R reported improved relationships with her power of attorney son, including more frequent visits to his home and even staying with him overnight and spending time with his family, which he hadn't done in a long time. Ms. R also reported that the emotional and verbal abuse she was suffering at home had stopped, and that the son who had exploited her had even told her that he loved her, which he had not said for many years before. So, and then lastly, the case prompted a short training from the team's civil legal specialist on deed theft in New York City and why it appears so easy to steal a person's home. There's a lot of deed theft in New York City. So there were a number of positive outcomes that came from that collaboration that happens at the enhanced multidisciplinary teams. And we are constantly talking about real cases and trying to deliver coordinated responses that meet the individual's needs and are holistic. So in this case, we're able to ensure that she was safe emotionally, that her home was safe, that she had her needs, that she had her care needs met, that she was going to church, that she could go to her senior center, that holistically she was kept safe and protected. So it's 8:32. This is just a quick resource that we will share with you after. It's a resource that is designed to be kept as a desk guide. We are acutely aware of the public health crisis of social isolation, and this provides some resources that are designed to help combat social isolation for older adults in the context of COVID-19. So you will have this. And I will stop there so that we can have some time for questions if people are able to stay on. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our speakers tonight. Thank you, Ayana. That was a wonderful, very thorough presentation. It's just been a wonderful program. I was wondering if we have any questions from our audience. By a show of hands or maybe on the chat. I actually have a question. Christina, I think this question might be for you, but if any of you have the answer, please. So let's say that I have a patient who says that they've been emailing with a very nice young man in Africa, and they're going to send them money because they're having a financial involvement, and you know, what is the best, is there any resource for this patient to be able, and then she realizes that the money is fraudulently acquired. What is the first number that I should give this patient to call in terms of triaging help for this patient?
Oh, okay. So she actually did realize.
Yes. Well, after she had sent like $3,000.
Oh, okay. And what is because now I'm saying, oh, well, let me think about that, unless Dina or Ayana, you have an immediate response. Because I have thoughts, I have questions. May I ask you, did she wire money, or do you know what form of payment?
She wired the money.
She wired the money. I mean, she definitely should. One of the things that I alluded to with reporting was that there are so many reporting resources, that this is my field, and I still just have this alphabet in my head. Because
I think that's true for a lot of us psychiatrists. Where do we start? You know, I think I would probably give her the switchboard number at Weill Cornell. You know, Ayana, I would give her your number and then let you guys talk to her, because even for you, it's you know, first of all, it's international. It's a wire transfer. The money's already been transferred.
I mean, look, that's in my wheelhouse. If she wants to have an initial, honestly, if she wants to have an initial conversation with me as an ear, not a paid service provider, yeah, because there's reporting to the FTC, there's reporting to various other, because it's an internet scam, there's the IC3 FBI reporting. I had one the other day where I was talking to the IRS because they want to, you know, maybe it's tax fraud. So I would love to talk to you, and I can look around because I know this is something that comes up. I have not. I work with gift card scam victims primarily as opposed to wire fraud, but it is still taking money, turning it into digital money and shooting it across borders. So yeah, do you want to just touch base offline and think this one through a little bit?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah.
Dina, one last question unless there are any other questions from our audience, raise of hand or chat box or the chat function, excuse me. Do you have a standard set of instruments where you assess capacity?
So for capacity, not a standard separate set for something like an elder abuse case, but just the basic 4 questions that we assess when there is a capacity issue. I would go for that, but I know that there's various people who see all sorts of age groups in their practices, and just making sure that beyond the mental status exam, we're trying the mini mental status exam or some kind of cognitive exam, at least with executive functioning as the primary outcome, so that we can get sort of a handle as to where they are and at least over time track it. So for example, if at some point there is an elder abuse case, especially with something like financial issues, and there's some kind of court case, you can at least show that, well, this person was capacitated or not. You know, that might be beneficial for them in that kind of case. I think just at minimum, you know, considering everybody's time, just a mini mental status exam periodically would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
So if there's no other. Yeah, I was just going to say if there's no other questions, we'll be sending out a PDF and other resources that we have discussed during our time together. And just we're deeply grateful to have spent the evening with you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ayana and Christina and Dina, for such a wonderful presentation. It was really outstanding. And I know these services are very important to our community and our psychiatrists. So thanks again on behalf of the Geriatric Psychiatry Committee. NYCPS. Thank you.